Come on, y'all.
Hi, this is Danielle Daws with a tutorial for UnityTV. I'm going to be showing you a cracked glass technique, but first I wanted to show you how I watercolored this image. I'm using Archival Ink on watercolor paper. Usually I would emboss an image on watercolor paper before watercoloring, but because I'm using embossing enamel in the next step, it just wouldn't work. So you can see I'm using Tattered Rose Distress Stain here to do the skin, and then I go back with a tiny bit of Tattered Rose ink, just the Reinker, to add where the shadows are going to be. I am going to add some extra shadow definition later on. And in the cheek, I'm actually using some very diluted Barn Door because I really want her to have that glow of vintage kind of looks. It's Vintage Photo I've used for the hair. And here you can see I'm using my Prismacolor pencil just to go over the top of the skin. And that's basically just to give it a little bit of protection for when I do the next sections of watercoloring. So the dress, you'll see that I do it in quite a few layers. I find that red is a little bit difficult to work with in that it is hard to remove any of the colour afterwards. So it's much better, or I have much better results from layering it up. So I'm using very diluted Barn Door and then going over the top again with just some diluted Barn Door and then with some Barn Door Reinker. So going from where the shadows would be. So you can see where the diluted Barn Door was, that's where the highlights will be. So again, just with Barn Door going over the top there, and hopefully you can see where the highlights are starting to pop out. Now where there are shadows indicated on the stamp, I'm going to use some fired brick. So you can see it just adding that extra bit of depth. The other thing that I do with distress watercolouring is I'll start with the base colour, then work all the way through to the shadows, and then work backwards. So once I've gone through fired brick, I'll then go back to Barn Door and just keep it going from there. That way I just find it blends the colours a lot easier together and just has a really nice effect in the end. Now onto the wings. I used a couple of different colours in the wings, starting with Scattered Straw, and then onto Wild Honey, then Rusty Hinge on just the inside bit there. And as I get to this bit here, you'll see that I'll add another colour, which is just some more Barn Door. It won't look the same as the Barn Door red of the dress because I've added it with all these yellows, but it will just add that depth that will kind of match the dress. And again, as I do with distress watercolouring, is I start with the lightest colours, then add the deeper colours, and then go in reverse, just to blend everything together. It seems to work for me. Hopefully it will work for you too. So you can see they're going back with some yellow over the top just to get the depth in those wings. Ordinarily I would use charcoal to add this definition here, but because I'm going to be using a Versamark pad later on to put the embossing enamel over the top, that will just take the charcoal straight off. So I've used a Prismacolor pencil. Here for adding the background, you can see that I'm adding, this is in weathered wood, I'm adding deeper colour around there, and then you'll see just here that I'll get the very diluted version and just drag it outwards. The final panel isn't going to be this large, but I want it to be larger so that I have an option of how large I want it to be. So I'm just dragging that colour out, and that will work for all the way around. So just finishing off the background there. And then I'll go back again with my Prismacolor pencil, just very lightly, just adding in some extra definition of where that would be. And again, this is just so that the Versamark pad won't pick that up. So this is the part with cracked glass. So using a Versamark pad, you need to put Versamark all over the entire image. And here I'm using an embossing enamel called Opals, which is made in Australia. It's very similar to UT. And then heat embossing it. It looks like granulated sugar because it's quite bumpy. Definitely not as fine as your ordinary embossing powder. You'll notice the first time I do this, it looks really bumpy and mottled and not very nice at all. It's supposed to look like that. You're supposed to have a couple of layers. So here goes the second layer, and you'll see after this second layer, it really does get a beautiful glossy shine to it. Now you can do this technique with ordinary embossing powder. You'll need multiple layers. I would do probably at least 4 just for me. Okay, so on to the really cool part of the technique. You need to put your image into the freezer for a few minutes. It will just allow the embossing enamel to become a bit brittle so that you can get these cracks. So you can see there I'm not trying to crease the paper. I'm using my fingers underneath there to protect it so I don't get an actual crease. I just want to bend it around enough so that the enamel will just crack. If you find it's not cracking enough, you probably need to pop it back in the freezer for a few minutes. One really cool thing you can do is to isolate areas. You can see I'm using my thumbs there to isolate her face so that I didn't get any cracks across her face. If you get cracks in the wrong spot, you can just heat it up again using your heat gun and start again. So that's it. For the back part of the card, I decided I wanted to create a panel of flowers coming down. So I'm using a stamp of the week image called Lovely Day. I'm using old paper distress ink here and my Stamp-A-Jig to just create that panel of flowers coming down. I really like how the old paper just looks nice and gentle on the back of this cardstock. I think it looks really pretty and just adds to that vintage feel. It's one of my favourite things to do for backgrounds. The last thing I wanted to show you was tying a bow using some seam binding. This is seam binding nut from the ribbon carousel. The way I tie a bow is I put the seam binding around the entire panel of the card. The ribbon that was in my left hand goes over the top and underneath. You can see I'm being quite particular with the knot there because that kind of dictates how the bow is going to sit. Then what's in your left hand you need to loop towards yourself, and then in the right hand loop around and pull through. And then from there you can play with it and make it sit the way you want it to sit. There's really nothing terribly extraordinary about the way that I tie a bow. It's just practice. So I've put some mounting foam on the back of my image here, just so I can put it on there. Another thing about the bow is that I don't adhere it to the card. It's just so I can then put it where I need it to go, which is not always where I think it's going to go. So yeah, now I just need to snip the ends and I'm done. Thanks very much for watching.